It's final, my mom announced, setting down her fork. Your sister gets your house. She has kids. Everyone at the table nodded like this was reasonable. Like this was normal. I smiled and reached for my bag. Funny you should bring up kids, I said. Because I have paperwork about what happened to hers. My grandmother's face went pale before I even opened the folder. Before I get into this, if you like stories where quiet people stop being quiet, hit subscribe now. You are going to want to see how this one ends. My name is Delaney. I'm 33 years old. And I own a custom furniture and cabinetry business outside Millbrook. I built it out of a one-car garage 9 years ago. Today I have a workshop, a showroom, and 11 employees. But none of that mattered to my family. To them, I was always just the daughter who didn't have kids yet. Let me tell you who's who first. My dad, Walter, is 61. He drove a delivery truck for 30 years before his back gave out, and he retired 2 years ago. My mom, Carol, is 59. And she has never worked a job in her life that she didn't complain about within a week. Then there's my older sister, Renata. She's 36, married to a guy named Grant. And they have 2 kids, Wells, who's 7, and Piper, who's 4. Renata and I were never close, not really. She was the one who got the bigger bedroom growing up, the one with the window seat, because she was delicate and got headaches if the afternoon sun hit her wrong. She was the one who got a car for her 16th birthday, a used blue Civic with a bow taped to the hood, while I got a bus pass and a part-time job at a hardware store 2 years later, at the exact same age, because by then my parents said money was tight. Funny how it was never tight for her. When Renata got married at 24, my parents paid for the entire wedding. A country club hall, a live band, an open bar that ran until midnight, and a photographer flown in from 3 states over because Renata liked his Instagram. Total cost, according to a receipt I once saw on the kitchen counter, was just over $31,000. When I mentioned years later, over Thanksgiving dinner, that I might want a small wedding of my own someday, my mother told me, without even looking up from her plate, "Well, you'll have to pay for that yourself, honey. We already did the big one." I told myself for years that it was temporary, that once Renata settled down and had kids, the favoritism would even out, that my parents would eventually notice I was the one actually showing up, fixing Dad's truck transmission myself on a Saturday because a shop quote was $1,200, covering Mom's $640 dental bill when her insurance lapsed for 2 months, driving 4 hours round trip every single Christmas because nobody in that family ever once offered to make the drive to see me instead. They never noticed. If anything, it got worse the older we got. Every visit, my mom found some new way to remind me that Renata had a real family, and I had just my little shop. Every time I brought up a new contract landing or a new hire at my business, the conversation somehow drifted back to Renata's kids within 2 minutes, like my life was a rest stop on the way to the real conversation. 3 examples stuck with me more than anything. First, when I turned 21 and asked, half joking, if my parents could help with a laptop for design school, my dad said flatly that I was old enough to figure it out myself. 6 months later, when Renata was 24 and wanted a new SUV because the Civic wasn't safe enough for a baby someday, my parents co-signed the loan without a second thought. Second, every birthday, Renata got a card with cash folded inside, usually somewhere between $200 and $300. Mine most years got a card with a joke about my age and nothing else. Third, and this one stung the most, when I finally opened my own workshop at 27, my parents didn't come to the small ribbon cutting I held out front. They were at Renata's baby shower for Wells that same weekend, 3 towns over, and nobody had even mentioned there was a scheduling conflict until after the fact. My grandmother, Iris, is 80, and she's the only one in that family who ever treated me like an equal instead of a backup plan. My Aunt Dovey, my dad's younger sister, is the same way. The 2 of them used to trade looks across the table whenever my mother started in on one of her comparisons, a small tightening around the eyes that told me they saw it too. I noticed every time. I just never said anything because saying something never seemed to change anything, and I'd rather keep the peace than start a fight I'd lose anyway. 2 months ago, Renata's house caught fire. She called me crying at 11 at night, saying they'd lost almost everything and the kids were terrified and shaking. I didn't hesitate for a second. I found them a furnished short-term rental on Cobble Ridge Road, paid the security deposit and the first 3 months myself, nearly $6,200 all in, and told her not to worry about a thing. That's the kind of sister I was. The kind who showed up with her checkbook before she even asked questions. I just didn't know yet how little that would end up mattering to any of them. Last Sunday my mom called at 8 in the evening. We're having a family dinner this Sunday. Everyone needs to be there. It's important. When my mother says important in that voice, low and clipped, it means something is coming for me. I just didn't know what yet. I showed up at 4:45 with a manila folder tucked under my arm. A habit I'd picked up a week earlier, after my Aunt Dovey warned me something was being planned. More on that in a minute. The whole family was there. Mom, Dad, Renata, Grant, Grandma Iris, and Aunt Dovey crowded into my parents' dining room, the same beige wallpaper that had been there since I was 12. My mother had made her usual pot roast, and the smell of it filled the whole downstairs the second I walked in, along with the low hum of a football game playing in the next room. We made it through most of dinner with normal small talk before my mother tapped her glass with a spoon. As everyone knows, she started, in the voice she uses for announcements, Renata's house burned down 2 months ago, and her family is squeezed into that little rental. It's not sustainable for children. Renata dabbed at her eyes on cue. The kids don't even have their own rooms, she said softly. The rental I'm paying for, I said. It wasn't a question. My mother pressed on like I hadn't spoken. Your father and I have talked with the family, and it's final. Your sister gets your house. She has kids. I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. You're single, Delaney, she continued. You don't need 4 bedrooms. Renata has 2 children who need stability. Once the insurance money comes through, she'll split some of it with you so you can find a smaller place. My dad added, without looking up from his plate, it'd be easier if you just agreed to it. Otherwise we'd have to get lawyers involved. We did help you with that down payment after all. That help was my grandfather's trust fund, set up for my education, which I never touched because I paid my own way through community college and a business certification program. I said as much. My mother waved it off like it was a technicality. That's when I opened the folder. Here's something my family didn't know. 3 years ago, my parents nearly lost their house. Dad's hours got cut, the mortgage fell behind, and the bank was 6 weeks from starting foreclosure. My parents never told anyone outside the house, too proud, I guess. But my Aunt Dovey knew, and she told me, because she was scared they'd end up homeless and too stubborn to ask for help directly. So I did something quiet. Through my business's holding company, Martian Company Design Group, I bought their delinquent note from the bank at a discount, for about $184,000, completely anonymously through my accountant and a title company 2 counties over. My parents got a letter saying their mortgage had been sold to a private note holder, who was willing to modify their terms and lower the monthly payment by almost $300. They were relieved. My mother even mentioned it to me at the time, not knowing I was the one who'd arranged it, saying, someone out there must have a heart because the bank sure didn't. She never asked who the new holder actually was. I never told her it was me. For 3 years, I had been quietly restructuring and covering shortfalls on the very house my parents were now sitting in, telling me to hand mine over to my sister. Every late fee I'd waived, every modified payment plan, every grace period when Dad's hours got cut again the following winter. All of it came from me, filtered through a holding company with a name that meant nothing to them. They had no idea their home only still existed the way it did because of me. And that Sunday, sitting at that table listening to my mother explain why I should give up everything I'd built, I realized it was finally time they found out exactly who they were talking to. Before I tell you exactly how I used that, make sure you're subscribed because what happened in that dining room is the part nobody at that table saw coming. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just started pulling folders out of my bag. The first folder was about Renata's fire. She'd been telling everyone it was an electrical fault. But the fire marshal's report, which I had a copy of thanks to a records request, said otherwise. The fire started because a space heater was left running next to curtains during a late-night party, while Renata and Grant had both been drinking. The children were found in a back bedroom, treated for smoke inhalation, and kept overnight at Millbrook General for observation. The second thing I brought up was insurance. Renata had been telling my mother for years that she paid her own homeowner's insurance. She hadn't. There was no policy on file, which meant there was no payout coming. Ever. I laid both documents on the table, calm as anything. So there's no insurance money to split with me, I said. Because there's no insurance. While the room processed that, I made one more move quietly, before dinner had even started. 3 days earlier I'd called my lawyer Priscilla and asked her to move fast. I need my house transferred into Marsh & Company by end of week, I told her. Whatever it takes. She asked what was going on and I explained everything: the pressure campaign, the fire, the insurance lie. She whistled low over the phone. They can't force a gift out of you, she said. But they can absolutely make your life miserable trying. Let's take that option off the table completely. 2 days later I sat in her office signing document after document, my hand steady the entire time, watching my house become, on paper, a fully protected business asset owned by the same LLC that already held my parents' mortgage note. By the time I walked into that dinner, there was nothing left for anyone to legally take, no matter how loud they got. Then I did the one thing that actually hurt them where it counted. I opened my banking app in front of everyone and canceled the recurring rental payment for Renata's temporary apartment on Cobble Ridge Road, the one I'd been quietly covering for 2 months. I also canceled the $540 monthly payment I'd been making on Renata and Grant's SUV, a loan from 18 months earlier that was supposed to be just until they got back on their feet. Effective today, I said. I'm done being everyone's safety net. The table exploded. You can't just cut them off, my mother snapped. They have children, Delaney. They had insurance money coming according to you, I said. Except there isn't any. Renata lied to you. To all of you. For 2 months. That's not relevant right now, Renata cut in, her voice shaking. It's extremely relevant, I said. You told Grandma the fire was electrical. You told Mom you had insurance. You told everyone at this table that I should hand over my house because your kids need stability. But you're the one who left a space heater running next to curtains during a party, while your kids were asleep down the hall. My grandmother's hand went to her chest. Renata, is that true? Is that really what happened? Renata's face had gone blotchy and red, but she still tried. It wasn't like that. It was an accident. Anyone could have. Anyone could have left a space heater running next to curtains during a party while their kids slept down the hall, I said. That's not an accident, Renata. That's negligence, and there's a fire marshal's signature on this report that says so. Grant tried to jump in. Look, we already lost the house. Isn't that enough? Why does she need to dig all this up? Because you all sat here and let my mother tell me I had to hand over my house to fund a lie, I said. That's why. My mother tried a different tactic. We're family, she said, her voice climbing. Family helps family. You have always been so selfish, Delaney, ever since you were a girl. Selfish, I repeated. I paid your rent for 2 months, Renata. I've paid your car note for 18. I paid for the roof on this house 3 years ago. And apparently I've also been the one keeping this house out of foreclosure for 3 years, because I bought your defaulted mortgage from the bank so you too wouldn't lose it. The room went dead silent. What are you talking about? My dad finally said. 3 years ago you almost lost this house, I said. Aunt Dovey told me. I bought your note through my company. Quietly. I never told you because I didn't want you to feel ashamed. But since apparently gratitude isn't really how this family works, you should know exactly whose decision it is whether that note ever gets called. My Aunt Dovey spoke up for the first time. I told her because I was scared for you both. Not so she could be blackmailed into giving away everything she built. This is not okay, my mother said, her voice rising. You're threatening your own parents. I'm not threatening anyone, I said, standing up and gathering my folders. I'm telling you the truth since apparently that matters so little in this house. My house isn't up for discussion. It never was. And starting today, neither is my checkbook. My mother stood up too, her chair scraping hard against the floor. You will regret this, Delaney. Family is forever. So is the fire marshal's report, I said. Funny how nobody in this house wanted to talk about that until I brought it up myself. Grandma Iris looked at Renata, then at my mother and said quietly, I think Delaney should leave and I think the rest of us have some things to discuss. It wasn't an accusation against me. It was the first time in years someone in that house had drawn a line that wasn't at my expense. I left. My hands were steady the whole drive home, which surprised me more than anything else that night. In the weeks that followed, Things moved fast, almost like dominoes falling one after another. The landlord on Cobble Ridge Road called Renata directly once my payments stopped, and within 10 days she and Grant were served notice for the remaining balance owed, close to $2,100. With no insurance payout and no savings to speak of, they ended up moving into my parents' house, the same house sitting on a note I now quietly controlled, cramming a family of 4 into a spare room in the finished basement, kids' toys stacked against the same water heater my dad had been meaning to replace for years. The auto lender repossessed the SUV within 3 weeks of the missed payments, since Renata and Grant hadn't kept up on it themselves either once my payments stopped. Aunt Dovey told me Renata cried on the porch when the tow truck came, insisting to the driver that there had to be some mistake. My grandmother quietly changed her will that same month. She didn't tell me all the details, only that some people needed to learn what consequences actually feel like, and it was long overdue. I later learned secondhand that Renata's share had gone from a third of the estate down to a small keepsake fund for Wells and Piper, held in trust until they turned 18, completely out of Renata's reach. My parents, for their part, went nearly 2 months without speaking to me at all. Then my Aunt Dovey mentioned, almost as an aside over coffee, that the house had gotten very loud very fast, with 4 extra people crammed into it and Renata blaming everyone but herself for the situation, snapping at my mother over dishes and complaining that the basement was too cold for the kids. My dad apparently had started sleeping with earplugs. I didn't call to gloat. I didn't need to. The house was already doing the talking for me. I did make one decision about the mortgage note. I didn't call it due. I didn't want my parents out on the street over something that was never really their fault, even if they'd let themselves become a weapon Renata used against me. Instead, through my lawyer, I sent a letter formally identifying myself as the note holder and offering to keep the modified terms exactly as they were, so long as no one in that house ever again tried to pressure me into handing over property, money, or anything else. My parents got the letter on a Tuesday, according to Dovey. They never mentioned it to me directly. They didn't have to. The calls asking me to reconsider the house situation stopped completely after that. My business had its best quarter ever that fall. I signed a contract to supply custom cabinetry for a new boutique hotel 2 towns over, worth just under $92,000, hired 2 more carpenters, and finally moved my workshop into a bigger space I'd been eyeing for years, one with actual loading doors instead of a garage I'd outgrown a long time ago. For the first time since I started the business, I wasn't running numbers in my head every night wondering how much of my own paycheck was quietly propping up someone else's life. Grandma Iris and I have dinner every other Sunday now, just the 2 of us, at a little diner she likes near her place, the kind with vinyl booths and coffee that's always a little too strong. Aunt Dovey comes when she can. We don't talk about Renata much. When we do, it's brief and it's honest, and nobody at that table ever asks me to hand over anything I've built. I still think about Wells and Piper sometimes. They didn't ask for any of this. Maybe someday, when they're older and can understand what actually happened that year, there will be room to rebuild something with them. For now, I've learned to hold that door open without walking through it myself. If there's one thing I'd want anyone watching this to take from my story, it's this. Help freely if you want to, but never let anyone convince you that loving your family means disappearing for them. The people who really love you will never once ask you to set yourself on fire so they can stay warm. If this story hit home for you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell me in the comments what you would have done at that dinner table. I read every single one.